are trying a different setup again, just to see how this will work out. We are YouTube live streaming as well as Periscope streaming. And so, trying to get this together. Good morning. We are continuing on with our last reading. Welcome. We're continuing on with our last book talk for the year. And that book is called Between the World and Me by Tanehisi Coates. He is a writer who is originally from the West Baltimore area. And we are completing this work as our last book talk today, this month rather, coming into December. And we're also live streaming through our YouTube channel, Church Love 333. And we picked up, or we started on Friday with his introduction to his work, talking about the question that he begins to ask his son in the book, and that is helping his son to figure out, as he says, how to live in his body, how to live within a black body, within a country lost in the dream. And so he said that is the question of his life. And Between the World and Me is really kind of his writing to his son at 15 and exploring the issues of race from a historical standpoint, but also from a personal experience standpoint. So this is where we are picking up today. Also, just to remind you that we are starting our last Bible study for the year, group Bible study, which will begin December 1st. And we will be looking at the subject and the theme, Nothing in Me, which references Christ's response to the enemy in John 14:30, where he says, "The enemy of this world, the prince of this world has come, and he shall find nothing in me." So we're going to delve into what is that nothing? What does that look like? We want to make sure that even as we close out the year, that we are doing a personal inventory, personal examination to make sure that we are not giving the enemy any room to operate in us as we move into a new year. And we know, if we've been following the Hebrew calendar, that technically the new year began in September. So most of us recognize that we're already into a new year. But for those that start their new year in January, this will be a very, very powerful Bible study for you. So let us get into today's reading. And thank you all for joining us by live stream. As I said, this is Ta-Nehisi Coates' memoir / historical writing on what it is like to be a black man in America, and some of his experiences and sharing that with his 15-year-old son. So here we go. I have never believed the brothers who claim to run, much less own, the city. We did not design the streets. We do not fund them. We do not preserve them. But I was there nevertheless, charged like all the others with the protection of my body. The crews, the young men who transmuted their fear into rage, were the greatest danger. The crews walked the blocks of their neighborhood loud and rude, because it was only through their loud rudeness that they might feel any sense of security and power. They would break your jaw, stump your face, and shoot you down to feel that power, to revel in the might of their own bodies. And their wild reveling, their astonishing acts made their names ring out. Reps were made, atrocities recounted. And so in my Baltimore, it was known that when Cherry Hill rolled through, you rolled the other way. That north at Pulaski was not an intersection, but a hurricane, leaving only splinters and shards in its wake. In that fashion, the security of these neighborhoods flowed downward and became the security of the bodies living there. You steered clear of JoJo, for instance, because he was cousin to Keon, the Don of Murphy Homes. In other cities, indeed, in other Baltimores, the neighborhoods had other handles and the boys went by other names, but their mission did not change. Prove the inviolability of their block, of their bodies, through their power to crack knees, ribs, and arms. This practice was so common that today you can approach any black person raised in the cities of that era and they could tell you which crew ran which hood in their city. And they could tell you the names of all the captains and all their cousins and offer an anthology of all their exploits. To survive the neighborhoods and shield my body, I learned another language consisting of a basic complement of head nods and head shakes. I memorized a list of prohibited blocks. I learned the smell and feel of fighting weather. And I learned that, "Shorty, can I see your bike?" was never a sincere question. And "Yo, you was messing with my cousin" was neither an earnest accusation nor a misunderstanding of the facts. These were the summonses that you answered with your left foot forward, your right foot back, your hands guarding your face, one slightly lower than the other, cocked like a hammer. Or they were answered by breaking out, ducking through alleys, cutting through backyards, then bounding through the door past your kid brother into your bedroom, pulling the tool out of your lambskin or from under your mattress, or out of your Adidas shoebox, then calling up your own cousins who really aren't, and returning to that same block on that same day to that same crew hollering out, "Yeah, Ian, what's up now?" I recall learning these laws clearer than I recall learning my colors and shapes, because these were laws that were essential to the security of my body. I think of this as a great difference between us. You, my son, have some acquaintance with the old rules, but they are not as essential to you as they were to me. I am sure that you have to deal with the occasional roughneck on the subway or in the park, but when I was about your age, each day, fully 1/3 of my brain was concerned with who I was walking to school with, our precise number, the manner of our walk, the number of times I smiled, who or what I smiled at, who offered a pound and who did not, all of which is to say that I practiced the culture of the streets, a culture concerned chiefly with securing the body. I do not long for those days. I have no desire to make you tough or street, perhaps because any toughness I garnered came reluctantly. I think I was always somehow aware of the price. I think I somehow knew that the third of my brain should have been concerned with more beautiful things. I think I felt that somewhere out there, some force, nameless and vast, had robbed me of what? Time, experience. I think you know something of what that third could have done. And I think that is why you may feel the need for escape even more than I did. You have seen all the wonderful life up above the tree line, yet you understand that there is no real difference in distance between you and Trayvon Martin, and thus Trayvon Martin must terrify you in a way that he could never terrify me. You've seen so much of all that is lost when they destroy your body. The streets were not my only problem. If the streets shackled my right leg, the schools shackled my left. Fail to comprehend the streets and you gave up your body now, but failed to comprehend the schools and you gave up your body later. I suffered at the hands of both, but I resent the schools more. There was nothing sanctified about the laws of the streets. The laws were amoral and practical. You rolled with a posse as to the party, as sure as you wore boots in the snow or raised an umbrella in the rain. These were rules aimed at something obvious, a great danger that haunted every visit to Shake and Bake, every bus ride downtown. But the laws of the schools were aimed at something distant and vague. What did it mean to, as our elders told us, grow up and be somebody? And what precisely did this have to do with an education rendered as rote discipline? To be educated in my Baltimore mostly meant always packing an extra number 2 pencil and working quietly. Educated children walked in single file on the right side of the hallway, raised their hands to use the lavatory, carried the pass when en route. Educated children never offered excuses, certainly not childhood itself. The world had no time for the childhoods of Black boys and girls. How could the schools? Algebra, biology, and English were not subjects so much as opportunities to better discipline the body, to practice writing between the lines, copying the directions legibly, memorizing the theorems extracted from the world they were created to represent. All of it felt so distant to me. I remember sitting in my seventh grade French class, not having any idea why I was there. I did not know any French people, and nothing around me suggested I ever would. France was a rock rotating in another galaxy, around the sun, in another sky that I would never come across. Why precisely was I sitting in this classroom? The question was never answered. I was a curious boy, but the schools were not concerned with curiosity. They were concerned with compliance. I loved a few of my teachers, but I cannot say that I truly believed any of them. Some years after I left school, after I dropped out of the college, I heard a few lines from Nas that struck me. Ecstasy, coke, you say it's love, it is poison. Schools where I learned they should be burned, it is poison. That was exactly how I felt back then. I sensed the schools were hiding something, drugging us with false morality so that we would not see, so that we did not ask why for us, and only us, is the other side of free will and free spirits and assault upon our bodies. This is not a hyperbolic concern. When our elders presented school to us, they did not present it as a place of high learning, but as a means of escape from death and penal warehousing. Fully 60% of all young Black men who drop out of high school will go to jail. This should disgrace the country, but it does not. And while I wouldn't crunch the numbers or plumb the history back then, I sensed that the fear that marked West Baltimore could not be explained by the schools. Schools did not reveal truths, they concealed them. Perhaps they must be burned away so that the heart of this thing might be known. Unfit for the schools, and in good measure wanting to be unfit for them, and lacking the savvy I needed to master the streets, I felt there could be no escape for me or honestly anyone else. The fearless boys and girls who would knuckle up, call on cousins and crews, and if it came to it, pull guns, seemed to have mastered the streets. But their knowledge peaked at 17 when they ventured out of their parents' homes and discovered that America had guns and cousins too. I saw their futures in the tired faces of mothers dragging themselves onto the 28 bus, swatting and cursing at 3-year-olds. I saw their futures in the men out on the corner yelling obscenely at some young girl because she would not smile. Some of them stood outside liquor stores waiting on a few dollars for a bottle. We would hand them a 20 and tell them to keep the change. They would dash inside and return with Red Bull, Mad Dog, or Cisco. Then we would walk to the house of someone whose mother worked nights, play the music, F the police, and drink to our youth. We could not get out. The ground we walked was tripwired. The air we breathed was toxic. The water stunted our growth. We could not get out. The year after I watched a boy with the small eyes pull out a gun, my father beat me for letting another boy steal from me. 2 years later, he beat me for threatening my ninth grade teacher. Not being violent enough could cost me my body. Being too violent could cost me my body. We could not get out. I was a capable boy, intelligent, well-liked, but powerfully afraid. And I felt vaguely, wordlessly, that for the child to be marked off for such a life, to be forced to live in fear, was a great injustice. And what was the source of this fear? What was hiding behind the smoke screen of streets and schools? And what did it mean that number 2 pencils, conjugations without context, Pythagorean theorems, handshakes, and head nods were the difference between life and death? Were the curtains drawn down between the world and me? I could not retreat, as did so many, into the church and its mysteries. My parents rejected all dogmas. We spurned the holidays marketed by the people who wanted to be white. We would not stand for the anthems. We would not kneel before their God. And so I had no sense that any just God was on my side. The meek shall inherit the earth meant nothing to me. The meek were battered in West Baltimore, stumped out at Walbrook Junction, bashed up on the Park Heights, and raped in the showers of the city jail. My understanding of the universe was physical, and its moral arc bent towards chaos, then concluded in a box. That was the message of the small-eyed boy untucking the piece, a child bearing the power to body and banish other children to memory. Fear ruled everything around me, and I knew, as all Black people do, that this fear was connected to the dream out there, to the unworried boys, to pie and pot roast, to white fences and green lawns neatly beamed into our television sets. But how? Religion could not tell me. The schools could not tell me. The streets could not help me see beyond the scramble of each day. And I was such a curious boy. I was raised that way. Your grandmother taught me to read when I was only 4. She also taught me to write, by which I mean not simply organizing a set of sentences, but organizing them as a means of investigation. When I was in trouble at school, which was quite often, she would make me write about it. The writing had to answer a series of questions. Why did I feel the need to talk at the same time as my teacher? Why did I not believe that my teacher was entitled to respect? How would I want someone to behave while I was talking? What would I do the next time I felt the urge to talk to my friends during a lesson? I have given you these same assignments. I gave them to you not because I thought they would curb your behavior. They certainly did not curb mine, but because these were the earliest acts of interrogation, of drawing myself into consciousness. Your grandmother was not teaching me how to behave in class. She was teaching me how to ruthlessly interrogate the subject that elicited the most sympathy and rationalizing myself. Here was the lesson. I was not an innocent. My impulses were not filled with unfailing virtue. And feeling that I was as human as anyone, this must be true for other humans. If I was not innocent, then they were not innocent. Could this mix of motivation also affect the stories they tell, the cities they built, the country they claimed as given to them by God? Now the questions began burning in me. The materials for research were all around me in the form of books assembled by your grandfather. He was then working at Howard University as a research librarian in the Moreland Spring Arm Research Center, one of the largest collections of Africana in the world. Your grandfather loved books and loves them to this day. They were all over the house, books about Black people, by Black people, for Black people, spilling off shelves and out of the living room, boxed up in the basement. Dad had been a local captain in the Black Panther Party. I read through all of Dad's books about the Panthers and his stash of old party newspapers. I was attracted to their guns because the guns seemed honest. The guns seemed to address this country, which invested the streets that secured them with despotic police in its primary language, violence. And I compared the Panthers to the heroes given to me by the schools, men and women who struck me as ridiculous and contrary to everything I knew. Every February, my classmates and I were herded into assemblies for a ritual review of the civil rights movement. Our teachers urged us toward the example of freedom marchers, freedom riders, freedom summers, and it seemed that the month could not pass without a series of films dedicated to the glories of being beaten on camera. The Black people in these films seemed to love the worst things in life, love the dogs that rent their children apart, the tear gas that clawed at their lungs, the fire hoses that tore off their clothes and tumbled them into the streets. They seemed to love the men who raped them, the women who cursed them, love the children who spat on them, the terrorists that bombed them. Why are they showing this to us? Why were only our heroes nonviolent? I speak not only of the morality of nonviolence, but of the sense that Blacks are in a special need of this morality. Back then, all I could do was measure these freedom lovers by what I knew, which is to say, I measured them against children pulling out in the 7-Eleven parking lot against parents, wielding extension cords, and, yeah, Negro, what's up now? I judged them against the country I knew, which had acquired the land through murder and tamed it under slavery, against the country whose armies fanned out across the world to extend their dominion. The world, the real one, was civilization secured and ruled by savage means. How could the schools valorize men and women whose values society actively scorned? How could they send us out into the streets of Baltimore knowing all that they were and then speak of nonviolence? I came to see the streets and the schools as arms of the same beast. I enjoyed the official power of the state while the other enjoyed its implicit sanction. But fear and violence were the weaponry of both. Fail in the streets and the crews would catch you slipping and take your body. fail in the schools, and you would be suspended and sent back to those same streets where they would take your body. And I began to see that these two arms in relation, those who failed in schools justified their destruction in the streets. Wow. The society would say he should have stayed in school and then wash its hands of him. It does not matter that the intentions of individual educators were noble. Forget about intentions. What any institution or its agents intend for you is secondary. Our world is physical. Learn to play defense, ignore the head, and keep your eyes on the body. Very few Americans will directly proclaim that they are in favor of Black people being left to the streets. But a very large number of Americans will do all they can to preserve the dream. No one directly proclaimed that schools were designed to sanctify failure and destruction, but a great number of educators spoke of personal responsibility in a country authored and sustained by criminal irresponsibility. The point of this language of intention and personal responsibility is broad exoneration. Mistakes were made, bodies were broken, people were enslaved. We meant well. We tried our best. Good intention is a hall pass through history, a sleeping pill that ensures the dream. Now, wow, he says a lot here. I would say probably from this section, the main theme that I got from it is the, how can I put it, parallelism of the schools and the streets. And I would say, having grown up in the hood, I would say he's 98% right. That you know, if you weren't succeeding in school, then you were sent back out to the streets. If you got in trouble in school, as he said, you know, you were suspended and sent home. As an educator, I always question, why would you send students to the place where they want to be, right? When you look at discipline in the classroom, why would I suspend you or give you outdoor suspension? Because outdoor suspension for most children is a mini vacation. So why would I send you to a mini vacation? Why would I not give you, you know, as most schools now have, why would I not give you the indoor suspension where you're still in school, but you're still required to do your work? You're still required to be in a learning environment. So that's actually a really good point that he brought out. The fact that literally sending a child, especially one raised in this environment that he's speaking of, sending them back home is really like sending them back into the jungle. He talks about this notion that school and the streets kind of worked together. When he goes into talking about personal responsibility, right? Because that is something that is said quite a bit. You know, if you fail in this country, it's because you chose to. That there is some personal responsibility involved, but there are also some institutions that are designed in the process of failure. And anybody who denies that is maybe has not been raised in America in its institutions. As he says here, I'll go back where he says, mistakes were made, bodies were broken, people were enslaved. We meant well, we tried our best. We tend to see failure in this country as, you've been given every opportunity, you've been given every right. Why aren't you doing well? Why aren't you doing well? And I see that I see that a lot with people divorcing institutions, with people divorcing systematic things that have been put in place in our country completely from a person's actions, right? We have things like the school to prison pipeline, where we know by research that children of color tend to be punished more severely, punished more often. Therefore, a record gets created of their misdeeds and behaviors, going as young as kindergarten. So in kindergarten, their behaviors are now on record. It establishes a pattern. That record goes with them all the way through 12th grade. So if I severely punish you and severely judge you when you are 4 and 5 years old, and I begin creating a record around your behaviors, by the time you get to middle school, your teachers in middle school are going to have that record. Your administrators are going to have that record of your behavior. So you're not really coming into your next level of education with a clean slate. Many times you're coming into your next level of education with someone having gone through your school record and deciding what kind of person you are based on what's written about you on record. And even if it may be minor things, the accumulation of those things can paint a picture about a person that may not even be true. And so, I would say as an educator, we have seen that many, many, many times. And some of the best educators I know would actually say, don't look at everything that has been written about that student or about that child. Look at them as a person coming into your class and give them a clean slate. So, that's one thing that can be encouraged in terms of the education side, is giving students a clean slate. Because if you don't, you can fall into the pattern of judging a student by their past. And we know nobody wants to really be judged by their past. Most people want the opportunity to do better. Most people want the opportunity to show that they have improved, or that they have grown, or that they have changed. But oftentimes that doesn't happen in a school setting. And so when you do that, when you're just simply going by what's on paper, you can formulate or prejudge a student coming into your class. And as he was saying here, you begin to make judgments about that student based solely on what's on paper. And next thing you know, that student has more stuff added to their record, or they're suspended. And the way that the school systems are set up now, especially public education, and its ties into the juvenile detention center, they take those records and then they start referring students for juvenile detention. So in other words, they take those records and now they're starting to kind of build a database on who's going to most likely fill a bed, maybe middle school, maybe high school, maybe they won't finish high school, but they're already kind of going into the future and trying to determine how many of these students are going to fill our prisons in the future. And if you know anything about privatized prisons, then you have a direct correlation between who, even as far as all the way back to kindergarten, who is being targeted as a problem from kindergarten to elementary school, to middle school, to high school, to maybe that student doesn't finish high school, but you've already started to map out and target them to hold a place in prison in the future. So if you think I'm saying something that's not correct, please email me at reachshante@gmail.com. And I would say just look at the data. Look at the data on the school to prison pipeline and who is targeted to fill prisons in the future. They look at your test scores for students. They look at your reading level, and they start determining how many of those students are going to fill space in a prison in the future. That is the sad reality of our country. So, yeah, we can talk about the American dream, but the reality is, while a student, especially in the environment that he's talking about, while a student is struggling to do what they need to do in school, there's also a system working against them to determine where they're going to be placed in society. So it's not just a cut and dry thing where, oh yeah, everybody has a chance and everybody has an opportunity. The truth be told, there are systems in place that are working to decide where you're going to fit in the landscape of American life. And if you are black and male, they start narrowing down where you're going to fit in American life very, very early in your life. So let's continue on to our last section here for today. An unceasing interrogation of the stories told to us by the schools now felt essential. It felt wrong not to ask why and then to ask it again. I took these questions to my father, who very often refused to offer an answer and instead referred me to more books. My mother and father were always pushing me away from secondhand answers, even the answers they themselves believed. I don't know that I've ever found any satisfactory answers of my own, but every time I ask it, the question is refined. That is the best of what the old heads meant when they spoke of being politically conscious, as much a series of actions as a state of being, a constant questioning, questioning as ritual, questioning as exploration rather than the search for certainty. Some things were clear to me. The violence that undergirded the country, so flagrantly on display during Black History Month, and the intimate violence of, yeah, Negro, what's up now, were not unrelated. And this violence was not magical, but was of a piece and by design. But what exactly was the design and why? I must know. I must get out. But into what? I devoured the books because they were the rays of light peeking out from the door frame. Excuse me. And perhaps past the door, there was another world, one beyond the gripping fear that undergirded the dream. In this blooming consciousness, in this period of intense questioning, I was not alone. Seeds planted in the 1960s, forgotten by so many, sprung up from the ground and bore fruit. Malcolm X, who'd been dead for 25 years, exploded out of the small gatherings of his surviving apostles and returned to the world. Hip-hop artists quoted him in lyrics, cut his speeches across the breaks, or flashed his likeness in their videos. This was early 90s. I was then approaching the end of my time in my parents' home and wondering about my life out there. If I could have chosen a flag then, it would have been embroidered with a portrait of Malcolm X, dressed in a business suit, his tie dangling, one hand parting a window shade, the other holding a rifle. The portrait communicated everything I wanted to be, controlled, intelligent, and beyond the fear. I would buy tapes of Malcolm's speeches, Message to the Grassroots, The Ballot or the Bullet. Down, excuse me, down at Everyone's Place, a black bookstore on North Avenue, and play them on my Walkman. Here was all the angst I felt before the heroes of February distilled and quotable. Don't give up your life, preserve your life, he would say. And if I got to give it up, make it even, Stephen. This was not boasting, it was a declaration of equality rooted not in better angels or the intangible spirit, but in the sanctity of the black body. You preserved your life because your life, your body, was as good as anyone's, because your blood was as precious as jewels, and it should never be sold for magic, for spirituals, inspired by the unknowable hereafter. You do not give your precious body to the billy clubs of Birmingham sheriffs, nor to the insidious gravity of the streets. Black is beautiful, which is to say that the black body is beautiful, that black hair must be guarded against the torture of processing and lye, that black skin must be guarded against bleach, that our noses and mouths must be protected against modern surgery. We are all our beautiful bodies, and so must never be prostrate before barbarians, must never submit our original self, or one of one, to defiling and plunder. I love Malcolm because Malcolm never lied, unlike the schools and their facade of morality, unlike the streets and their bravado, unlike the world of dreamers. I loved him because he made it plain, never mystical or esoteric, because his science was not rooted in the actions of spooks or mystery gods, but in the work of the physical world. Malcolm was the first political pragmatist I knew, the first honest man I'd ever heard. He was unconcerned with making the people who believed they were white comfortable in their belief. If he was angry, he said so. If he hated because it was human for the enslaved to hate the enslaver. Natural as Prometheus hating the birds. He would not turn the other cheek for you. He would not be a better man for you. He would not be your morality. Malcolm spoke like a man who was free, like a black man above the laws who prescribed our imagination. I identified with him. I knew that he had chafed against the schools, that he had almost been doomed by the streets. But even more, I knew that he had found himself while studying in prison, and that when he emerged from the jails, he returned wielding some old power that made him speak as though his body were his own. If you're black, you were born in jail, Malcolm said. And I felt the truth of this in the blocks I had to avoid, in the times of day when I must not be caught walking home from school, in the lack of my control over my body. Perhaps I too might live free. Perhaps I too might wield the same old power that animated ancestors that lived in Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, Nanny Cujo, Malcolm X, and speak, no act as though my body were my own. My reclamation would be accomplished like Malcolm through books, through my own study and exploration. Perhaps I might write something of consequence someday. I have been reading and writing beyond the purview of schools all my life. Already I was scribbling down bad rap lyrics and bad poetry. The air of that time was charged with the call for a return to old things, to something essential, some part of us that had been left behind in the mad dash out of the past and into America. This missing thing, this lost essence, explained the boys on the corner and the babies having babies. It explained everything from cracked out fathers to HIV, to the bleached skin of Michael Jackson. The missing thing was related to the plunder of our bodies, the fact that any claim to ourselves, to the hands that secured us, the spine that braced us, the head that directed us, was contestable. This was 2 years before the Million Man March. Almost every day I played Ice Cube's album, Death Certificate. Let me live my life. If we can no longer live our life, then let us give our life for the liberation and salvation of the Black nation. I kept the Black Power episodes of Eyes on the Prize in my weekly rotation. I was haunted by the shadow of my father's generation by Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. I was haunted by the bodily sacrifice of Malcolm by Attica and Stokely. I was haunted because I believed that we had left ourselves back there, undone by COINTELPRO and black flight and drugs. And now in the crack era, all we had were our fears. Perhaps we should go back. That was what I heard in the call to keep it real. Perhaps we should return to ourselves, to our own streets, to our own ruggedness, to our own rude hair. Perhaps we should return to Mecca. So, as you're reading, in case you didn't know, Tanehisi identifies as an atheist, and you can kind of see a lot of his journey. But even if you don't identify with any type of faith, you can actually see his struggle to understand what is happening in Black America at this time, in the 90s especially. One of the things that I'll close with today, one of the things that he points out is that even with a public school education, most of the things that were taught to Black people in public schools had to do with nonviolence, which I think is a I think is a very good assessment, right? If you look at history, if you look at things you learned in public school, most of the time you will go back and you can look at your public history school teaching, and you can see a strong distinction between what is taught concerning white America. If you go back to the War of Independence, the War of 1812, what's the other one? The Revolutionary War. right? World War One, World War Two. You're going to see a history of white Americans being encouraged to do what? To fight for their future, to fight for their lives, to fight for their freedom, to take land because God commissioned them to do it. Manifest destiny, right? That's a doctrine that you're actually taught in public school, that the founders of our nation, the early explorers as well, believed that they had a divine right to kill, murder, slaughter, rape, and procure land from people who are already here. They believed they had a divine right to do that. And they teach that in public school. But on the flip side of that, which I think is a very good point, when you're talking about Black people's role in this country, you're going to hear about slavery. You're going to hear about subjection. You're going to hear about subordination. You're going to hear about not being counted as a human, right? With the three-fifths compromise. You're going to hear about begging, pretty much begging for your rights to be free. And then, as he pointed out, there's a lot of emphasis in teaching Black Americans about peaceful protest. There's a lot of emphasis on nonviolence, that you don't fight back, that's the way you accomplish your goals in this country as a Black person, is to be nonviolent, be quiet, march, sit in, and not fight back. But he points out something very, very, very important, that is not the same history that's given to white Americans. So on that note, we don't close. And I want you to think about that. We'll come back tomorrow and do our next section of reading. But I want you to think about, why is it that, for the most part, the history that Black Americans are given about themselves is one of nonviolence and peaceful protest. And the history that white America is given about themselves is die at all costs, fight to the death, go down fighting, start a revolution, give us what we want, or we're going to take it. That's two very different mindsets and worldviews that are put out there at the same time when you're going through school. So even though it's not, in some cases, it may not be a direct statement to students, that is what can be taken away from the kind of education that we give in this country. So no, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of Black Americans don't believe they don't believe in Second Amendment rights. Why would they? Right? Why would they, exercise their Second Amendment rights if they have been fed a steady diet of don't resist, be nonviolent, be peaceful, march, sit in, and eventually, maybe somewhat, kind of, sort of, will give you equal rights in this country. All right. So this was our reading for today. I hope I gave you something to think about. I hope you do some research on the school to prison pipeline. There is plenty of data and documentation out there. And I will see you on tomorrow. Same place, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This has been our book talk, Reflections on Race. Take care and God bless. Now, if I could just figure out how to get this to turn on. Let's see. This doesn't even go. Okay. There we go. All right. Thank you guys for viewing today. I hope that I said something that would make you think about our systems in this country. We'll see you back tomorrow. God bless.